The rope burns on Sarah's wrists had stopped bleeding 3 days ago, but the pain remained as sharp as the memory of how she'd gotten them. She sat hunched against the cottonwood tree where they'd left her, watching the buzzards circle overhead with a detached fascination that came from accepting death as inevitable. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the small clearing, and her lips were cracked and swollen from thirst. She no longer bothered to struggle against the bonds that held her ankles together and her hands behind her back. The Kellerman gang had taken everything from her. Her father's ranch, her dignity, her hope. They'd burned the homestead to the ground after killing her father and brother in cold blood, all because Jacob Kellerman claimed the land belonged to him by right of power. When she'd fought back, screaming curses at them through her tears, they'd decided death was too quick for her. Better to let the desert do their work slowly, they'd said with cruel laughter. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, who'd died of consumption 2 winters past. At least she'd gone peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by love. Sarah had always imagined she'd die the same way, maybe with children of her own to mourn her. Instead, she'd become buzzard food at 22, alone in the wilderness with nothing but regret for company. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her eyes snap open. Another gang member coming to check if she was dead yet, perhaps, or maybe just a drifter who'd stumble upon her remains. She no longer had the strength to call out, so she simply watched as a single rider emerged from the mesquite brush. He wasn't what she expected. The man who dismounted 30 feet away moved with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle, his buckskin clothing and long black hair marking him as Comanche. War paint streaked his high cheekbones, and a rifle rested easily in his hands as he approached. Sarah had heard enough stories to know that her fate might be sealed either way, but at least it would be quick. The warrior stopped just out of reach and studied her with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His gaze moved from her torn dress to the rope burns on her wrists, then to her swollen face where Kellerman's fist had left its mark. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "Who did this to you?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What men?" "Kellerman gang." Something flickered in the warrior's expression at the name. He knelt beside her and withdrew a knife from his belt, causing Sarah to flinch involuntarily. Instead of threatening her, he cut through the ropes binding her wrists with swift, careful strokes. The relief as circulation returned to her hands was so intense she nearly cried out. "Can you ride?" he asked, moving to free her ankles. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. The warrior caught her before she could fall, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her sit back down. Without a word, he walked to his horse and returned with a water skin. The first sip of cool water was like a blessing, and she had to force herself not to drink too quickly. "Thank you," she managed when she could speak again. The warrior studied her face intently. "I am called Running Wolf. You are the daughter of the man who gave me water last spring when I was wounded." Sarah's eyes widened with recognition. Her father had told her about the injured Comanche brave who'd appeared at their door, shot by buffalo hunters who'd left him for dead. Against her brother's protests, Thomas Morrison had doctored the man's wounds and given him food and water before sending him on his way. "You knew my father. He was a good man. He treated me with honor when others would have killed me." Running Wolf's expression hardened. "Kellerman's men burned your home 3 days ago. They killed Papa and Jamie." The words came out flat and lifeless, as if speaking them might make the pain bearable. Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "I have been tracking Kellerman for 2 weeks. He and his men killed my cousin when they raided our village for horses." The pieces fell into place in Sarah's mind. This wasn't a chance encounter, but the convergence of 2 separate hunts for justice. She looked up at the warrior who'd saved her life, seeing not the savage from frontier stories, but a man driven by the same need for vengeance that had been eating at her own heart. "Take me with you," she said. Running Wolf shook his head. "You are weak. You need rest and food. I need to see them pay for what they did." Sarah struggled to her feet, swaying but determined to stay upright. "I know their habits, their hideouts. My father tracked them for the territorial marshal before he settled down to ranch. I grew up hearing their stories." The warrior considered this, his dark eyes measuring her resolve. "The path of vengeance is a hard one. It changes a person. I'm already changed." Sarah's voice carried a steel that surprised them both. "They made sure of that when they left me here to die." Running Wolf nodded slowly. "Then we hunt together. But first you need strength. He helped her onto his horse, swinging up behind her with practiced ease. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in days. Purpose. The numbness that had protected her from the worst of her grief began to crack, replaced by a burning need to see justice done. They made camp in a hidden canyon where Running Wolf had been tracking the gang. While he tended to his horse, Sarah examined the supplies he'd brought. Everything was chosen with care, from the jerky that would keep indefinitely to the ammunition that would fit multiple weapons. This wasn't the random violence of angry men but the careful preparation of a skilled hunter. "You've done this before," she observed, accepting the food he offered. "Many times. White men take what they want and leave nothing but death behind. Sometimes they must be reminded that actions have consequences." Running Wolf settled beside the small fire he'd built. "Your father understood this. He told me once that a man must stand for something, or he'll fall for anything." Sarah recognized the words. Her father had said the same thing to her and Jamie countless times growing up. Hearing them now in this place, spoken by the man who'd saved her life, felt like a message from beyond the grave. "Tell me about Kellerman," she said. Running Wolf's expression grew grim. "He leads 15 men, all of them killers. They move from place to place, taking what they want and burning what they don't. The law cannot touch them because they know the territory too well and have friends in high places. Not all of them." Sarah corrected. "Marshal Davidson is honest, but he's one man with a territory larger than most states, and Kellerman has Judge Whitmore in his pocket. Then we must be our own justice." They spent the evening planning, sharing what they knew of Kellerman's habits and haunts. Sarah found herself drawn to Running Wolf's quiet competence, the way he listened carefully to everything she said and weighed each piece of information. There was no wasted motion in anything he did, no unnecessary words. He was a man stripped down to his essential self by hardship and purpose. As the fire died down, Sarah realized she felt safer than she had in months. Not just physically safe, though Running Wolf's presence was undeniably reassuring, but spiritually safe. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she belonged somewhere. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Running Wolf was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My people have a saying. When someone saves your life, you become responsible for what they do with it. Your father saved mine, now I save yours. But more than that," he paused, studying her face in the firelight, "you have the look of someone who will not be broken by what has happened to you. That is rare. It should be honored." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "I feel broken. Broken things can be mended. Sometimes they become stronger in the mended places." Running Wolf stood and began preparing his bedroll. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we begin the hunt." But sleep wouldn't come easily. Sarah lay staring up at the stars, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago she'd been a rancher's daughter with simple dreams of marriage and family. Now she was planning to hunt down killers with a Comanche warrior who spoke of honor and responsibility in ways that made her father's teachings seem shallow by comparison. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Running Wolf returned from scouting with grim information. Kellerman and his men had hit another homestead, this one belonging to a family with 3 young children. The attack had been even more brutal than usual, with the barn burned and the livestock scattered. The family had barely escaped with their lives. "They're getting bolder," Sarah said, studying the distant smoke on the horizon. "And more desperate. That means they're planning something big." Running Wolf nodded. "The question is what?" The answer came from an unexpected source. As they prepared to break camp, a rider approached under a white flag. It was Billy Crane, one of Kellerman's youngest gang members, barely 18, and looking like he'd aged a decade in the past week. "I want to talk," he called out, his voice shaking. "I'm done with this. I want out." Running Wolf's rifle never wavered from the young man's chest. "Speak." Billy dismounted slowly, his hands visible at all times. "Kellerman's planning to hit the bank in Sweetwater tomorrow during the harvest festival. Every family for 50 miles will be there with their savings. He figures to take enough to disappear to Mexico permanent-like." "Why tell us this?" Sarah asked. Stepping into view, Billy's face went white when he saw her. "Jesus, Sarah, we thought you were dead," Kellerman said. He swallowed hard. "I tried to talk him out of leaving you like that, but he said you'd brought it on yourself. Be fighting back when you murdered my family." "I didn't kill nobody," Billy protested. I held the horses, that's all. I swear on my mother's grave. Running Wolf studied the young man with calculating eyes. What do you want in return for this information? Safe passage out of the territory. I got a sister in Colorado who'll take me in. I just want to be done with all this killing. Sarah felt a familiar rage building in her chest. This boy had stood by while her father and brother were murdered, had watched as she was tied up and left to die. Part of her wanted to see him pay for his cowardice. But another part, the part that sounded like her father's voice, recognized genuine remorse when she heard it. There's a way you can earn that passage, she said slowly. Help us stop them. Billy's eyes widened. I can't fight against my own gang. They'd kill me. Then don't fight, Running Wolf said. Help us in other ways. Tell us about their plan. Where they'll be positioned, how many men. For the next hour, Billy spilled everything he knew about Kellerman's operation. The gang had been planning the Sweetwater job for months, waiting for the harvest festival when the bank would be fullest. They'd split into 3 groups, one to hit the bank, one to control the street, and one to watch the escape routes. It was ambitious and dangerous, the kind of score that would either make them rich or get them all killed. Kellerman's getting desperate, Billy explained. Lost too many men in the last few months. Word is the territorial government's putting together a special force to hunt us down. This is his last big play before we run for Mexico. Sarah and Running Wolf exchanged glances. A special force would explain why Kellerman was moving so aggressively, burning bridges and leaving witnesses. He was trying to grab as much as possible before the law caught up with him. We need to get to Sweetwater, Sarah said after Billy had ridden away with Running Wolf's promise of safe passage. Warn the marshal. Warning will not be enough. Kellerman has 15 men and Davidson has maybe 3 deputies. The townspeople are farmers and shopkeepers, not gunfighters. Running Wolf was already breaking down their camp. We need a better plan. Sarah's mind was racing through possibilities. Sweetwater was built around a central square with the bank on one side and the general store on the other. During the harvest festival, the square would be packed with families, children, and elderly folks. If shooting started, innocents would die. What if we could separate them? She mused. Split up the gang before they hit the town. How? The plan that formed in Sarah's mind was dangerous, maybe suicidal. But it was also the only way she could see to save innocent lives and get justice for her family at the same time. They'll be coming from the north, through Devil's Canyon. It's the only route that gives them cover almost to the town limits. What if we could convince them the law was waiting for them there? Running Wolf considered this. They would take the southern route through the hills. But that adds hours to their journey. Exactly. And it splits them up because the southern route can't handle 15 riders at once. They'd have to go single file through most of it. Sarah's excitement was building. What could pick them off a few at a time? What? Running Wolf's voice was carefully neutral. You plan to fight. I plan to finish what they started. Sarah met his gaze steadily. This isn't just about revenge anymore. Those people in Sweetwater don't deserve to die because Kellerman's desperate. If we can't stop him, who will? Running Wolf studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we will need help. The help came from an unexpected source. Running Wolf's cousin, Greyhawk, had been tracking the gang from the other direction with 2 other warriors. When they met that evening, Sarah found herself the only white person in a war council that would have terrified her a week ago. Now, she listened as the men discussed tactics in a mixture of English and Comanche, occasionally adding her own observations about the terrain and the gang's likely movements. The woman speaks truth, Greyhawk said after Sarah described how Kellerman's men typically position themselves during a robbery. She knows these men. Too well, Sarah replied grimly. The plan they settled on was complex but elegant. Greyhawk and his warriors would create sign that looked like a cavalry patrol had passed through Devil's Canyon, complete with horseshoe prints and scattered supplies. When Kellerman's scouts found the false trail, they'd report back and the gang would be forced to take the longer southern route. Meanwhile, Sarah and Running Wolf would position themselves at the narrowest point of that route, a place called Widow's Gap where the trail wound between high rocks. They'd have the advantage of elevation and surprise, but they'd also be outnumbered 5-1 if things went wrong. You don't have to do this, Running Wolf told her as they prepared to leave. You have already done enough by giving us information about their habits. Sarah checked her rifle one more time. a weapon she'd learned to shoot when she was 12 but had never used on a human being. Yes, I do. This is about more than just stopping a bank robbery. It's about proving that actions have consequences, like you said. My father believed that, and he died for it. I won't let his death be meaningless. Running Wolf nodded, understanding passing between them without words. They were no longer just a Comanche warrior and a white woman thrown together by circumstance. They were partners in a mission that neither could complete alone. The ride to Widow's Gap took them through country that grew more beautiful and more dangerous with each mile. Sarah found herself acutely aware of everything around her, the way the morning light caught the red rocks, the sound of their horses' hooves on stone, the quiet strength of the man riding beside her. She was riding toward almost certain death, but she felt more alive than she had in months. They reached the gap just as the sun was setting, giving them enough light to choose their positions carefully. Sarah took the eastern ridge while Running Wolf positioned himself on the western side, their rifles positioned to create a crossfire that would trap anyone trying to ride through the narrow passage below. Remember, Running Wolf called softly across the gap, "Let them all enter before we begin. We want them contained." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see her in the growing darkness. Her hands were steady on her rifle, but her heart was pounding hard enough that she was sure the sound would give her away. She'd never killed anyone before, had never even seriously considered it. But when she thought of her father's face, of the way Jamie had called her name as he died, her resolve hardened. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed with no sign of the gang, and Sarah began to worry that their plan had failed. Maybe Kellerman hadn't taken the bait. Maybe he'd decided to postpone the robbery. Maybe Billy had lied about everything. Then she heard at the distant sound of horses picking their way carefully along the rocky trail. Sarah pressed herself flat against the stone and tried to control her breathing. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The first rider to come through the gap was a scout, moving slowly and studying the rocks above for signs of ambush. Sarah held her breath as he passed directly below her position, so close she could have reached out and touched him. Behind him came the rest of the gang, spread out in a long line just as she'd predicted. She counted them as they passed. 8, 9, 10. Where were the other 5? Had they split up after all? Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate threat. 10 men were still more than enough to destroy Sweetwater if they weren't stopped. The last rider had barely cleared the gap when Running Wolf's shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. The lead scout tumbled from his horse, and suddenly the narrow passage erupted in chaos. Horses reared and screamed as the gang tried to figure out where the attack was coming from. Sarah sighted down her rifle at a man she recognized, Pete Rawlings, who'd held her while Kellerman beat her father. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the big man spun out of his saddle with a cry of pain. It was easier than she'd expected, and that scared her more than the gunfire. The gang was trapped between the high walls of the gap, unable to retreat or advance effectively. But they were experienced fighters, and they quickly began to organize a defense. Some dismounted and took cover behind rocks, while others tried to climb the walls to get at their attackers. Sarah shifted position just as bullets began chipping stone around her previous location. She could hear Running Wolf's rifle firing in steady rhythm from the other side, and she tried to match his calm precision. But her hands were shaking now, and her shots were going wide. A rope sailed through the air near her head, and she realized someone was trying to climb up to her position. She grabbed her pistol and fired down at the climber, watching him fall with a sickening thud. The sound of his body hitting the rocks would stay with her forever. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours, when the shooting finally stopped. 5 men lay dead in the gap and 3 more were wounded badly enough that they couldn't continue. The surviving gang members had scattered, disappearing into the rocks like ghosts. Sarah made her way down to the gap on shaking legs, her rifle ready but her mind reeling from what she'd just done. She'd killed at least 2 men, maybe more. Part of her felt sick at the thought, but another part felt a grim satisfaction. Justice had been served, even if it had come at the end of a gun. Running Wolf was already moving among the bodies, checking for survivors and collecting weapons. His face was grim but unsurprised, as if this was just another day's work. When he saw Sarah approaching, he studied her expression carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. Like I understand why my father always looked sad when he talked about the war. Taking a life changes you even when it's justified. Yes, but the choice was taken from us when they chose to prey on innocent people. You did what was necessary. Among the dead was Pete Rawlings, the man who'd held her during the beating. Sarah stared down at his body, waiting for the satisfaction she'd expected to feel. Instead, she felt only a hollow sadness. Revenge wasn't the sweet victory she'd imagined. It was just another loss in a world that seemed full of them. "We need to get to Sweetwater," she said. "The others will still try to hit the bank." Running Wolf nodded. "But first, we send a message." He gathered the surviving gang members' weapons and horses, then helped Sarah write a note that he tied to one of the wounded men's horses. The message was simple: "Kellerman, your men are dead. Leave this territory or join them. This is your only warning." They let the wounded men ride away, knowing they'd spread word of what had happened. It was psychological warfare, designed to make the remaining gang members think twice about following their leader into what might be a trap. The ride to Sweetwater took them through the night, pushing their horses hard across country that was treacherous in the darkness. Sarah found herself staying close to Running Wolf, drawing comfort from his steady presence. She was no longer the same woman who'd been left tied to a tree less than a week ago, but she wasn't sure yet what she was becoming. They reached Sweetwater just as the sun was rising, painting the small town in shades of gold and amber. The harvest festival was already beginning, with families arriving from surrounding farms and ranches. Children ran between the wagons while their parents set up booths and prepared for a day of celebration. Sarah felt her throat tighten at the sight. These people had no idea how close they were to disaster. If she and Running Wolf hadn't acted, this scene of innocent joy would have turned into a bloodbath. Marshal Davidson was in his office, preparing for the day's festivities. He looked up in surprise when Sarah and Running Wolf entered, his hand dropping automatically to his gun before he recognized them. "Sarah Morrison, we never even imagined you might still be alive. Ever since your father's house burned down, the search for the Kellerman gang has been ongoing. This is Running Wolf. He saved my life and helped me stop Kellerman's men from hitting your bank today." Sarah quickly outlined what had happened, watching Davidson's expression grow more grim with each detail. "You're telling me you killed half of Kellerman's gang in Widow's Gap?" Davidson's voice was carefully neutral. "We're telling you that Kellerman was planning to rob your bank during the festival. We stopped him." Running Wolf's voice carried a quiet authority that made the marshal take notice. Davidson studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll send deputies to the Gap to confirm your story. In the meantime, I suppose I owe you both a debt of gratitude. That festival represents most of the savings in this county." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. The immediate threat was past, and Kellerman's gang was broken. But as relief flooded through her, she realized she had no idea what came next. Her home was gone, her family dead, her old life erased. What was she supposed to do now? As if reading her thoughts, Running Wolf spoke quietly. "There is a place for you among my people, if you wish it. You have proven yourself a warrior. You would be honored." The offer surprised her, but as she considered it, Sarah realized it made perfect sense. She'd crossed a line in that canyon, become something new. The old Sarah Morrison was dead, buried under the cottonwood tree where they'd left her to die. The woman who'd emerged was harder, more dangerous, but also more complete. "And if I don't wish it?" she asked. "Then you make your own path, but you do not make it alone." Running Wolf's dark eyes held promises she wasn't sure she was ready to understand. Before Sarah could respond, shouts erupted from the street outside. Through the window, she could see people running and pointing toward the edge of town. A rider was approaching at full gallop, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the arrogant set of his shoulders. "Kellerman," she breathed. The outlaw leader rode into the town square like he owned it, his remaining men spread out behind him. Sarah counted quickly only 6 men, including Kellerman himself. The losses at Widow's Gap had cut his force to less than half, but he was still dangerous. "People of Sweetwater," Kellerman's voice carried across the square. "I've come for what's mine. Empty your pockets and your bank, and nobody gets hurt." Marshal Davidson was already moving, checking his weapons and calling for his deputies. But Sarah could see the math as clearly as he could. 6 armed outlaws against 3 lawmen and a handful of armed townspeople. People were going to die. "There's another way," she said quietly. Running Wolf understood immediately. "Challenge him directly." And this without innocent blood. Davidson looked at them both like they were insane. Sarah, you're not a gunfighter. And no offense to your friend here, but Kellerman's killed more men than either of you have shot rabbits. Maybe. But I'm the one he really wants to face. I'm the one who got away, who cost him half his men. His pride won't let him back down from me. Sarah checked her pistol, surprised by how calm she felt. And I've got nothing left to lose. Before either man could stop her, Sarah walked out into the street. Jacob Kellerman, she called out, her voice carrying across the square. You want to finish what you started? Here I am. The outlaw leader turned in his saddle, his face twisting into a cruel smile when he saw her. Well, the little Morrison girl. I wondered who'd been causing me so much trouble. Just me. And I'm calling you out. Sarah walked slowly toward the center of the square, her hand resting on her gun. You murdered my family. You left me to die. But I'm still here and I'm still fighting. Kellerman dismounted with theatrical flair, his men spreading out to give him room. You want to dance, little girl? Let's dance. Sarah had never been in a formal gunfight before, but she understood the ritual. They walked toward each other slowly, stopping when they were 20 paces apart. The festival crowd had fled to the edges of the square, leaving them alone in the dusty street. You cost me good men, Kellerman said, his hand hovering over his gun. But I'll make it quick. You got more sand than I gave you credit for. I got something else too, Sarah replied. I got nothing left to lose. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, but her mind was strangely clear. She thought of her father, of Jamie, of all the innocent people who'd suffered because of this man's greed. She thought of Running Wolf, watching from the marshal's office with those dark eyes that had seen too much violence. Kellerman's hand moved first, but Sarah was already in motion. Her father had taught her that the first to draw wasn't always the first to hit, and that accuracy mattered more than speed. Her bullet took Kellerman in the chest, just as his shot went wide, the sound of the gunfire echoing off the buildings around the square. The outlaw leader stood for a moment, looking down at the spreading stain on his shirt with surprise. Then he fell backwards into the dust, his gun spinning away from his lifeless fingers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then one of Kellerman's men reached for his weapon, and suddenly the square erupted in gunfire. But this time, the outlaws were outnumbered and outgunned. Marshal Davidson and his deputies had positioned themselves strategically, and Running Wolf had somehow appeared on a rooftop with his rifle. The fight was over almost before it began. Sarah stood in the middle of the square, staring down at Kellerman's body. The man who'd haunted her nightmares was gone, reduced to nothing more than meat and bone in the dust. She waited for the triumph, for the sense of closure she'd expected. Instead, she felt only a profound weariness. It's over, Running Wolf said, appearing beside her as if by magic. Yes, Sarah agreed. It's over. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The killing was over. The immediate threat was past, but her life was just beginning. She was no longer the rancher's daughter who'd lived for simple pleasures and small dreams. She was something new, something forged in violence and tempered by loss. As the townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places, Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. Some showed gratitude, others fear, and a few showed something like respect. She'd become a legend today, whether she wanted to or not. The story would spread, how Sarah Morrison had tracked down her family's killers and faced them in the street like a gunfighter. What now? She asked Running Wolf. He considered the question seriously. Now we choose who we become next. The past is gone. The future is unwritten. Sarah nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. They'd started this journey as strangers thrown together by tragedy. They were ending it as something else entirely, partners, friends, maybe something more given time. I think I'd like to see your village, she said finally. Learn your ways. I don't think I fit in the white world anymore. Running Wolf smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. You would be welcome. But first we honor the dead. All of them. They spent the rest of the day in Sweetwater, helping the townspeople clean up and giving statements to Marshal Davidson. Sarah found herself the center of attention, with people wanting to shake her hand and hear her story. She answered their questions politely but felt disconnected from their excitement. They saw her as a hero, but she knew better. She was just someone who'd survived when others hadn't. As evening approached, she and Running Wolf prepared to leave. They'd bought supplies and fresh horses, and Sarah had withdrawn what little money her father had left in the Sweetwater Bank. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start over. "You sure about this?" Marshal Davidson asked as they prepared to mount up. "There's talk of making you a deputy. Could use someone with your skills." Sarah considered the offer seriously. A few days ago, she might have jumped at the chance to stay in the familiar world of her childhood. But that world was gone, burned away with her father's ranch. What remained was the promise of something new, something that honored what she'd lost while embracing what she'd become. "Thank you, Marshal, but I think my path lies elsewhere." She swung into her saddle, feeling the familiar comfort of a good horse beneath her. "Take care of these people. They're good folk." As they rode out of Sweetwater, Sarah looked back once at the town, where she'd killed a man in the street and become something she'd never expected to be. Then she turned her face toward the horizon, toward the uncertain future that awaited her. Beside her, Running Wolf rode in comfortable silence, his presence a steady anchor in a world that had shifted beneath her feet. They'd found each other in violence and loss, but what they'd built together was something else entirely. It was partnership, understanding, and the promise of a different kind of life. The stars were coming out as they made camp that first night, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Sarah lay on her bedroll, staring up at them, and thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been a rancher's daughter with simple dreams. Now she was riding into the unknown with a Comanche warrior who'd saved her life and helped her find her strength. "Do you think we'll find peace?" she asked the darkness. Running Wolf's voice came from across the fire, warm and thoughtful. "Peace is not something you find. It's something you make, every day with every choice." Sarah smiled, understanding flooding through her. The past was behind them, full of pain and loss that would never fully heal. The future was uncertain, full of challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But the present was theirs to shape, one choice at a time. She closed her eyes and let the sounds of the night wash over her. The crackle of the fire, the soft sounds of the horses, the distant call of a coyote. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new chances to become who they were meant to be. For tonight, though she was content to be exactly where she was, alive, free, and no longer alone. The woman who'd been left bound and broken under a cottonwood tree was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that justice sometimes came at the end of a gun, but that mercy was a choice that defined the person wielding it. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, witnesses to the small human drama that had played out beneath them. In their light, Sarah Morrison began the long journey toward becoming someone new, someone who could honor the past while embracing an uncertain but hopeful future. The Wild West had taken everything from her, but it had also given her something unexpected, the chance to discover who she really was when everything else was stripped away. And in that discovery, she found not just survival, but the possibility of something approaching peace.